Thanks for staying with us. This is Business Incorporated on Channels Television. I am BC Adebayo. Coming up today, Libya struggles to restore oil production as OPEC members spare the country from participating in output cut deal, and Tula Oil signs 4 production sharing contracts in Ivory Coast. Plus, South Sudan's first international oil conference fails to attract biggest global energy firms. Well, let's kick off from the markets in Africa, where the Nigerian stock market is trending higher at intraday with 0.03%. The GSA index appears to be giving up previous gains, and it's down 0.19%, while Egypt's market is up 0.58%. Well, the markets in Kenya are reacting to the political uncertainty in the country as the all-share index dropped 0.67% on Wednesday. The all-share index has lost 5.5%, and the blue chip index is down 10% since the August election was annulled. And the Gulf markets are all in the green at intraday. The Abu Dhabi index is up 0.24%, while Dubai and Qatar indexes are 0.62% and 0.1% higher also at intraday. The Saudi index is also up 1.09%. Well, let's cross over to Europe, where the buses were mixed this morning, with investors digesting data and monetary speeches from central bankers at the International Monetary Fund's annual meeting in Washington. For more on the European markets, let's talk to Janelle Dumoulin, who's at the Frankfurt Stock Exchange. It's good to have you again on the program today. Janelle, well, the ECB President Mario Draghi and several other ECB members are set to speak at the IMF's annual meeting in Washington. And of course, yesterday, the IMF released its Financial System Stability Report. What sound bites are investors expecting to hear from Draghi?
Well, almost always whenever Mario Draghi talks, you can be certain that investors will be scanning for clues as to the future of the ECB's stimulus program. And especially this time around, because we have a key policy meeting in the ECB coming up in exactly 2 weeks' time on October 26th. So that's where a discussion on whether the asset purchases will be slowed down from the level that they are now. That's, of course, 60 billion euros a month. And of course, they also want to know when this will happen. Now, investors would also be curious as to whether Mario Draghi will make any sort of special effort to try and talk the euro down, which continues to pick up in strength as the eurozone recovery seems to maintain its momentum and as headwind risks still seem to exist for the dollar. Now, but because he hasn't really made any moves towards trying to talk the euro down in his previous speeches, investors would obviously be very surprised if he did end up saying something to that effect.
Now, away from the IMF now, third quarter earnings are on board. What's on tap from the European banks, and what are investors hoping to see from these numbers?
Well, European banks will definitely be looking across the pond to their U.S. counterparts because earnings season for the banks is kicking off there. We've already seen some U.S. banks come out with the results, like the likes of J.P. Morgan Chase, already reporting a 7.1 increase in quarterly profits on things like loan growth and higher interest rates. But here in the continent, banking shares have not seemed quite so cheery. London's HSBC, France's BNP Paribas, Spain's BBVA, and Netherlands ING losing anywhere between 0.4% and 1.4%, depending on which bank it was. Also here in Germany, we saw Commerzbank slide 0.2%, Deutsche Bank 0.6%, and that's mostly because the European Commission had proposed new rules to try and shore up banks against future financial crises. So that doesn't seem to have been received very well over here, and that is a discussion that the banks will continue to follow.
Now, one last question, Janelle. German airline Lufthansa wants to sign a contract with Air Berlin to acquire some of the latter's assets after it became insolvent. How is this news driving the travel and leisure stocks and the markets in general?
Well, we've already seen the key players in these negotiations, so Air Berlin itself and Lufthansa and that third contender, EasyJet, their shares all up. Lufthansa in particular saw its shares spike up a whopping 2.7% on the news. That represents a 17-year high for the Lufthansa stock price, so obviously investors were very happy about that. We've seen more details about the deal trickle in since then, like Lufthansa investing 1.5 billion euros in absorbing 3,000 of Air Berlin's former staff and, of course, buying more than 80 planes. Now, that being said, that deal isn't completely out of the woods just yet because it's still waiting on a green lighting from EU competition authorities, and this is where EasyJet would then come in. EasyJet is currently in talks to buy anywhere between 20 to 30 of the remaining planes that Lufthansa isn't snapping up, but nothing appears to have been finalized. Those talks have appeared to have encountered some challenges in the last days, and if those talks collapse, that could prove a problem for Lufthansa's deal as well, because that approval from the competition authorities would be harder than incoming. So arguably, what ends up happening to the rest of Air Berlin will be, of course, significant as well to Lufthansa.
Many thanks, Janelle, for those updates, and we'll see you again tomorrow.